2 people were killed and at least 2 others were injured in Denver, Colorado, on the evening of Saturday, January 11th, when a 24-year-old man went on a random stabbing spree. Identified by law enforcement as Elijah D. Caudill, the suspect attacked his victims over an hour-long period, starting at around 5 o'clock p.m. The first victim, a male, was slashed in the face while leaving his workplace. 10 minutes later, the suspect stabbed 71-year-old American Airlines flight attendant Celinda Levno in the throat. She died the next morning. Another male victim survived after being slashed in the torso and rushed to the hospital with critical injuries. And Caudill was captured after police saw him running around in public with a knife in his hand. Shortly after his arrest, the 4th victim was found with a fatal knife wound to the back. There are no known connections between the victims and Caudill, who has a lengthy criminal history, including multiple past charges for assault. He remains held without bond on 2 counts, each of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and assault with a deadly weapon. Number 14. Sandra Coto Navarro. A Queens, New York woman is facing a second-degree murder charge following the discovery of her building superintendent's body. According to prosecutors, 48-year-old Sandra Coto Navarro battered and stabbed 55-year-old Jose Portillo to death amid a dispute over $24,000 in back rent that she and her husband owed to their landlord. Portillo's body was found under a bed and covered with bags in Navarro's Kew Gardens apartment. He had gone to the unit to discuss Navarro's back rent when an altercation broke out. The property owner later told police that he saw Portillo enter the apartment but never saw him leave. Portillo's brother eventually requested a welfare check, leading to the discovery of his remains. He was pronounced dead at the scene, and Navarro, who was home alone at the time, was arrested after video evidence proved that her husband wasn't home at the time of the incident. In addition to the murder charge, Navarro is facing charges of tampering with physical evidence and weapon possession. She remains held without bail at Rikers Island amid the ongoing case. Number 13. Tyrell Stermons. A cognitively impaired North Carolina woman left her family's Fayetteville home in a stranger's car and was later found dead in the woods. Doorbell camera footage showed 25-year-old Heather Williams getting into a light-colored sedan at around 10 p.m. on January 4th. 3 days later, police launched a missing person investigation and issued an endangered person alert due to the young woman's disabilities. In addition to cognitive impairment, Williams had limited use of her right arm and leg due to being hit by a car in 2015. She was also almost mute and could talk very little, and her family said she was overly trusting of strangers due to brain damage from the accident. Several days later, Williams's body was found roughly 5 miles from her house. Her death is being investigated as a homicide, and her family believes she may have met her killer online. 12 days after Williams was last seen alive, authorities charged 30-year-old Tyrell Stermons with first-degree murder. He was recently released from prison after serving time for a robbery, kidnapping, and shooting, which the victim survived. Number 12. Vigilantism gone wrong. Last October, a 25-year-old military member was lured to a college campus in Worcester, Massachusetts, as part of a vigilante mission inspired by the TV show To Catch a Predator. He was in town for his grandmother's funeral when he went to meet a young woman he had connected with on a dating app. Upon arriving at the designated meeting location on the Assumption University campus, the man was led into a basement where a large group of people emerged and began accusing him of trying to pursue inappropriate activity with a minor. The active duty soldier fled and was chased to his car by around 24 people, several of whom recorded the incident with their phones. One of the assailants slammed his head into his car door before he escaped. Investigators found no evidence that the victim thought Brainard was underage. 6 students are facing conspiracy and kidnapping charges, including Brainard, Easton Randall, Kevin Carroll, Isabella Trudeau, Joaquin Smith, and an unnamed teenager. The suspects all pleaded not guilty in mid-January and are awaiting a pretrial conference which is scheduled for March 28th. Number 11. Rolando Corte. Eager to establish a better life for herself and her 4 children, 39-year-old Lucrecia Hadan Sumba moved to the United States from Ecuador in 2021. She worked hard and saved up enough money to bring 3 of her kids to the US one by one. But her American dream was abruptly cut short in early January when she vanished without explanation. Hadan Sumba was reported missing after failing to show up for her scheduled work shift at an Elizabeth, New Jersey nail salon. On January 11th, her body was found in a dumpster in Coopersburg, Pennsylvania. She had died from sharp force injuries. People had noticed that Hadan Sumba's husband, 42-year-old Rolando Corte, seemed uninterested in his missing wife's whereabouts, and one of the couple's sons, told police that his parents were having marital problems. Corte was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder and is being held without bail. According to charging documents, he confessed to the murder to at least one witness. When questioned by police, he said that only he and God know what happened to Hadan Sumba. Number 10. Teen heroes denied reward. A few weeks ago, we discussed the arrest of Sebastian Zapata Caudill, who is accused of setting a homeless woman on fire on a New York City subway train. The victim, 57-year-old Debrina Kawam, died from her injuries. Police immediately launched a manhunt for the killer, and a $10,000 reward was offered for information, leading to his capture. Several hours later, a trio of high school basketball players spotted Zapata Caudill on a Queens-bound F train. They called 911, and thanks to their vigilance, the accused murderer was promptly taken into custody. Because the teens dialed 911 instead of calling a designated Crime Stoppers tip line, they were denied the $10,000 reward, and while they didn't report Zapata Caudill for the money, they're disappointed that they missed out on the money just because they called 911 instead of the more complicated tip line number, which they didn't even know about. An NYPD representative told the New York Post that there are instances when people who report criminals are able to collect a Crime Stoppers award after calling 911 rather than the tip line, and that these decisions occur on a case-by-case basis. Zapata Caudill remains held without bail pending the outcome of his case. Number 9. Jake Fahri. Less than 2 years after being released from prison, 35-year-old convicted murderer Jake Fahri is back behind bars for violating the rules of his supervision. Fahri fatally slashed a teenager named Jimmy Mizzen with a broken cake dish in 2008 after starting problems with Mizzen and his brother inside a London bakery for no apparent reason. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 14 years in 2009 and was released from prison after serving his minimum term despite having a documented history of violence. Less than a year and a half after Fahri's release, his drill rap music was promoted on BBC's One Extra radio station, sparking widespread outrage from Mizzen's family and their supporters. Some of the music contained violent lyrics, and one song even mentioned Mizzen's death, prompting Mizzen's mother to fight for Fahri's parole to be revoked. The authorities ruled that Fahri had violated his parole by filming a music video in a prohibited location, and he was taken back to prison amid an ongoing investigation. Number 8. Mackenzie Shirilla. In August of 2023, an Ohio teenager named Mackenzie Shirilla was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison for ramming her car into a building at 100 miles per hour during a fight with her boyfriend a year earlier, killing 20-year-olds Dominic Russo and Dominic Flanagan. Shirilla had maintained her innocence throughout her trial, blaming her actions on medical issues, and continued to deny that she deliberately killed the victims during her sentencing hearing. In newly released police footage from Shirilla's arrest, the tearful teen could be heard asking a police officer to be careful with the handcuffs so they didn't break her bracelet. She remained quiet during the drive to jail and even appeared to try napping at one point, but was otherwise clearly upset about the situation. Some have speculated that Shirilla was crying for herself, rather than out of remorse for her actions, and that sentiment is likely shared by the victims' families, who were disappointed that Shirilla didn't receive a heavier prison sentence. Records show that she'll become eligible for parole in September 2037 at the age of 33. Number 7. Fake delivery ambush. In a harrowing home invasion that was captured on surveillance video, 66-year-old George Dirk Hardison was ambushed by a pair of intruders disguised as Amazon delivery men. In the footage, the suspects could be seen approaching Hardison's Savannah, Georgia residence from a public sidewalk, while one of the men carried a box. For the next 8 minutes, the attackers beat Hardison with a sledgehammer. The men then took off running with $80 in stolen cash, and Hardison was found by neighbors who overheard him calling for help. He was covered in blood and had multiple head injuries, which he narrowly survived after doctors closed his wounds with over a dozen staples. In a statement, Savannah Mayor Van Johnson described the incident as a targeted attack. The suspects remain at large but will be charged with aggravated assault, aggravated battery, and home invasion once they're identified and captured. Number 6. Jazzlynn Roush. Newly released police body cam footage reveals the shocking discovery of a missing Las Vegas woman whose deceased body was found in a locked freezer at her home in November 2024. In the video, officers are met by Jazzlynn Roush, who claimed he was house-sitting for 68-year-old Monique Gilbertson. Roush, who identifies as transgender and legally changed her name from Daniel in 2022 told the cops that she had rights to the property, but she and her wife, Gina Lopez, eventually relented and let the officers inside. After finding the freezer hidden under clothing in a utility room, the police called a locksmith. It was clear that Gilbertson had been frozen for some time and had a large amount of fentanyl in her system despite not being a drug user, leading to the suspicion that she was forcefully overdosed. Prosecutors believe Roush killed Gilbertson on the same day the victim tried kicking her out after taking her in while she was homeless. Gilbertson had called the police just weeks earlier due to a roommate issue, and Roush is facing a second-degree murder charge in connection with her death. Number 5. Waldo Mejia. A Bronx teenager called Caleb Rios was walking to school on the morning of January 10th when a stranger stabbed him twice in the chest in an unprovoked attack. As he lay dying on the pavement, he called his dad and said he was scared and couldn't breathe. Rios died from his injuries at a nearby hospital. Using surveillance footage and other evidence, investigators identified the suspect as 29-year-old Waldo Mejia, who has a history of mental illness and previous arrests. Just days earlier, Mejia had been arrested for stabbing a local resident's doorbell camera, but because the crime did not qualify as bail eligible in New York State, the authorities had no choice but to release him ahead of an upcoming court date. Mejia is also suspected of slashing a man in the arm at a subway station on January 5th. He's being held without bail on a second-degree murder charge, but some outspoken critics are equally blaming the state's generous bail reform laws for Rios' death, including NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch, who said that the existing system did not allow the authorities to keep Mejia in custody for lower-level crimes. Number 4. Scott Barnett. A cold case double homicide from over a decade ago may now be solved after a homeless man walked into a Baltimore, Maryland police station and admitted to the murders. 45-year-old Scott Barnett dropped the bombshell confession on Sunday, January 12th, when he told law enforcement that he and the mother of his child, Ashley Barnett, had killed 2 people 10 years ago. He didn't remember the victims' names, but based on the circumstances he described, authorities believe he was referring to the murders of 46-year-old Charles Webster and 41-year-old Tyrell Stermons, who were reported missing in December 2014. Barnett said that he and Ashley were living with the victims when Webster began extorting money and drugs from the couple. He claimed that he and Ashley stabbed Webster and Stermons to death and dismembered their bodies. The victims' remains were never found, and Ashley can't verify the story because she drowned while high on drugs in 2022. But police found Barnett's story credible enough to detain him on suspicion of murder. He remains in custody as the investigation continues. Number 3. Clifford Hunt Jr. Police in North Sewickley, Pennsylvania, found an entire family massacred at their home on the night of January 12th. 48-year-old Michelle Hunt and 51-year-old Clifford Hunt Sr. were dead from gunshot wounds to their head. Their sons, 19-year-old Clifford Hunt Jr. and 16-year-old Cody Hunt, were rushed to the hospital in grave condition but later succumbed to their injuries. Police knew the Hunts as avid hunters who kept a lot of firearms in the home, but the entire community was shocked by the violent tragedy, which no one saw coming. Authorities believe Clifford Hunt Jr. committed the killing and are currently working to piece together what happened inside the home. A law enforcement spokesperson said that they've been unable to conclusively determine the circumstances that led up to the shooting or a motive for the crime. Number 2. Jasmin Thompson. Last week we discussed the murder of 43-year-old Janira Roundtree, who was fatally stabbed outside her Staten Island housing project on January 7th during a fight involving her daughter. Roundtree had reportedly gone outside to defend her daughter from other girls during a social media-fueled brawl involving at least 20 people when she was attacked. The accused stabber, 25-year-old Jasmin Thompson, initially fled the state before surrendering to law enforcement on a second-degree murder charge on Monday, January 13th. Before she turned herself in, she claimed during a podcast that Roundtree wasn't being a real mum. Speaking with Elliot Carter of LFTG Radio, Thompson insisted that she only picked up the knife after someone had used it to stab Roundtree. She has a lengthy rap sheet but is maintaining her innocence with the help of celebrity attorney Mario Gallucci, who has been recognized as one of the nation's top trial attorneys, describing the deadly fight as a modern-day Hatfields and McCoys. Gallucci told the New York Post that nobody deserves to die, but Miss Roundtree certainly didn't come into this with clean hands. Thompson remains held without bail as she awaits her next court date. Number 1. Brenton Clarke. Shortly before 6 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, January 16th, a crazed Florida man embarked on a seemingly random campaign of murderous violence in downtown Miami. During the unprovoked rampage, 36-year-old Brenton Clarke allegedly beat a sleeping homeless couple with a metal rod. He then ran across the street and punched another homeless victim, several times before running off with the man's belongings. 5 minutes later, the suspect fatally bludgeoned a fourth victim with the metal rod before returning to the second victim and knocking him onto the ground with a large piece of wood. He then went back to the first two victims and continued beating them, killing one of the two. Clarke fled on foot upon being confronted by an armed Good Samaritan, but was quickly apprehended by law enforcement. He remains in custody on multiple charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and armed robbery with a deadly weapon. His alleged motive for the killings remains unclear.